All right, today we are going to be talking about Jamestown, and we're going to use the acronym FIRST to describe what went on at Jamestown. Okay, now these notes you need to do on your own paper. So be sure you are copying these as we go along. Okay, now before we get to the acronym itself, it's important to talk about. Yes, we say that Jamestown was the first, but it was the first what? Okay, and I mentioned this last week. It is the first permanent English colony in the New World. Okay, that's why we make a big deal about Jamestown being first. It is the first permanent English colony in the New World. All right, I mentioned it last week. You had the Spanish down in Florida, they were technically the first Europeans in the New World. And then you had the English trying at Roanoke Island. That was kind of the first English attempt in the New World. So Jamestown is the first because it is the first permanent English colony in the New World. All right. Now, when we think of Jamestown, we often think of these pictures right here. Okay. We got a picture of John Smith down there in the right. Okay. We've got a picture of the fort there in the top. And then on the left, we got a picture of the map of Virginia with Jamestown there on the James River. The James River, of course, flows into Chesapeake, and then the Chesapeake flows into the Atlantic. Okay, so these are images that we think about when we think about Jamestown. Okay, now what are some important aspects of Jamestown? Okay, the first letter in first, F. F stands for founded by the Virginia Company of London. Okay. And the reason the Virginia Company of London founded Jamestown was for land. Okay. They wanted land because land equals money, land equals power. And by money, we mean gold. Okay. Now, early on, there were some thoughts that they would find gold and other precious material, other precious gems and stuff like that. But that quickly disappeared. Okay. Because they just weren't finding it. All right. So Jamestown is founded as a business colony. Okay. The Virginia Company wanted land, land equaled money, land equaled power, and of course, by money, we mean gold. Okay, so Jamestown is a business colony. It was there for money, land, and gold. Now, 1607 is when it was founded. One of the early leaders was Captain John Smith. Okay, the original settlers were only men and boys. Okay, no women came. And a lot of them were from your more noble classes of society in England, your gentry classes in society. So they were not used to working. Okay. And John Smith, when John Smith arrived and John Smith kind of takes over, John Smith tells the people there at Jamestown, he tells the men and boys at Jamestown, he that will not work shall not eat. Okay. And because of his leadership, the colony ends up surviving. A couple of near misses. I mean, there, like I said, I think I said this last week. There were several times where Jamestown almost failed because they were starving and the people were giving up hope and everything. And John Smith works hard to establish good relationships with the Indians, and he works hard to get people to work so that the colony will survive. Okay, so Jamestown Business Colony, 1607. The original settlers were all men and boys. Okay. Now, these pictures represent who was going to do the work in Jamestown. Okay. And of course, you can see three of those images deal with slaves and slavery. The other image deals with the I in first, and that stands for indentured servants. Okay. Indentured servants and slaves. They were the ones that were going to do the work in Jamestown. All right. Now, an indentured servant is from a poor family in England. They wanted to come to the New World, but they couldn't afford to come to the New World. So they agreed to work for their passage over. Okay. And they agreed to work for a period of 7 years for somebody. Okay. And after that period of 7 years, they would be granted their freedom. They would be given some land and some tools for them to survive on their own. And of course, they had their passage paid for when they came over to the New World. Okay. The first African slaves arrive in 1619. Okay. And some of them originally, now not too many, okay, we're not talking like bunches, but a few of them were treated as indentured servants. Okay. After a period of a few years, after a period of about 7 years, they could earn their freedom, and they also were granted land and tools. And some of them even go on to own their own slaves and their own servants. Okay. Um, and again, the indentured servants were usually poor. They could not afford the trip. They agreed to work for their passage to Jamestown. There's the definition of indentured servant down there. Slaves were not so lucky, but some of them were also treated as indentured servants when they came over first. Now, again, not too many. Of course, that will change quickly. Um, and they won't be allowed their freedom. But a few of them did gain their freedom and ended up owning slaves themselves. By the way, the first major boatload of women comes over in 1619. By 1609, some of the wives of some of the men that are already there come over. But once the colony looks like it's going to survive, they send over a much larger boatload of women in 1619 as well. So now they can start creating families and creating people in Jamestown. All right. This picture represents another important group, okay? The Native Americans in Jamestown, all right? And of course, one of the most famous Native Americans in Jamestown is Pocahontas, all right? And I've got a little picture there of the Disney film Pocahontas with a big old X through it, because if you think Pocahontas and John Smith had a romantic relationship, I'm sorry to say they did not, okay? They did not. All right. R in first stands for the relationship with the Powhatan Indians. Okay. The Powhatan Indians are the group that we are talking about here. Um, they brought food and worked with John Smith to help the colony survive. Okay. And of course, the daughter of Chief Powhatan was Pocahontas. For years, there was this legend that she and John Smith had some sort of romantic relationship. It was not. It is not true. He was in his late 20s, early 30s when he's here in Jamestown, and she was between the ages of 10 and 13. Okay, and he writes about her in his writings, but he also kind of talks about the fact that she's kind of annoying because she's always around the settlement and things like that. Now that's going to be beneficial to them later on, but there's definitely no romantic relationship between Pocahontas and John Smith. All right, and if they had not cultivated those relationships between the Powhatan Indians, like John Smith working with the Powhatans to get the Powhatans to bring them food, Jamestown probably would not have survived as long as it did. Okay, so the Powhatans are going to be very, very key to helping the settlement survive. All right. Relationship with the Powhatans it's going to fluctuate over the years. Sometimes they're really good. Sometimes they're really bad. In fact, there's some uprisings against Jamestown by the Indians. And of course, then they have to be put down. Then things get better. Things really get better after Pocahontas does marry one of the settlers, John Rolfe. Okay. And the story with that is Pocahontas is visiting the settlement one day. She actually gets captured, and while she is captured, she kind of falls in love with John Rolfe, and she and Rolfe get married, and that's going to bring a era of peace between the Powhatans and the settlers at Jamestown. Okay, but relationship with the Powhatan Indians, very, very important. All right, pictures there represent an important commodity for Jamestown. Those are all pictures of tobacco. Okay, the S in first stands for sold tobacco. Tobacco is a cash crop. In fact, tobacco is what is going to help save Jamestown economically. Okay, Jamestown, we talked about, was founded to make money. Okay, and a lot of the early business ventures failed. They tried making glass there. In fact, if you visit the Jamestown site today, you can visit the original foundations of the glass house. They tried to make glass there. That was somewhat successful. They tried to find gold, and of course, there's no gold out there. All right. So the colony is struggling economically until they discover tobacco. And we have John Rolfe to thank for that. John Rolfe takes English tobacco and crossbreeds it with native tobacco. Okay, and the result is a plant that is much, much sweeter than what is currently available in Europe. Okay, the tobacco in Europe is very, very bitter, and Rolfe's tobacco is very, very sweet and very, very mild. Okay, and once we have this strain, that crop is going to take off, and that's what's going to start bringing money into the colony. Okay, so tobacco is a cash crop, and that's what saves Jamestown economically. The last letter refers to a very, very important part of Jamestown history. The last letter, T, stands for the House of Burgesses. Okay, now the House of Burgesses is the first elected representative government. Okay, it was founded in 1619. All right, 1619, very, very big year for Jamestown. You've got the House of Burgesses being founded, you have the arrival of the first Africans, and you have the arrival of a large quantity of women. Okay, so 1619 going to be a very, very big year for the Jamestown colony. Now, back to the House of Burgesses. The idea that instead of the king appointing a council, okay, the people in Jamestown would be able to choose their representatives for themselves from the group that is there. Okay, that is a big deal. All right, it hadn't happened before. It takes a while to get off and running. Okay, so 1619 is the year that it is officially created, but it is not fully established until the 1640s. And today, our concept of Congress, okay, at the national level and at the state level, the Virginia General Assembly has its roots at this House of Burgesses. Okay, so the House of Burgesses, specifically the Virginia General Assembly today, it is the oldest representative form of government in the United States. Okay, and it paved the way for things like the United States Congress. Okay, so the House of Burgesses, which was started in 1619, is the first representative government, still around today as the Virginia General Assembly, and also helps serve as a model for our national government. Okay, and again, it's a big deal because the king is not appointing those, the people themselves get to elect their representatives from among themselves. Okay, so a very, very big deal with that. All right. Now, real quickly, let's just review the who, what, why, where, when, how, so what of Jamestown. Okay. Now, the who, of course, are the settlers. Who were the settlers? Who were the leaders? Who were their neighbors? Okay. The who were English men and boys. Well, before we get there, the what type of colony was Jamestown? Was it a religious colony or a business colony? What was the first type of government for the colony of Jamestown? The why. Why did the settlers go to Jamestown? Why did Jamestown nearly fail? The when was it settled? When was the House of Burgesses established? Where was Jamestown? So, what's the big deal? Why is Jamestown important? Why do you all have to know all these things about it? And the how. How was Jamestown saved from failure? Okay, so that's what we're going to look at. Who were the settlers? Who were the leaders? Who were their neighbors? What type of colony was it? And what was the first type of government in that colony? Why did the settlers go to Jamestown? Why did Jamestown nearly fail? When was Jamestown settled? When was the House of Burgesses established? Where was Jamestown? Why? What's the big deal? Why is it important? Why do we have to know all these things? And how was Jamestown saved from failure? All right. The who. The who, we're talking about English people, especially at the beginning, we're talking about English men and boys. The key leader was John Smith. Remember, John Smith said that he that will not work shall not eat. Okay. And the neighbors, of course, were the Powhatan Indians. Okay. They're the ones that are going to help save Jamestown. The what? Jamestown was a business colony. Now, we're going to talk about Plymouth. Plymouth is a religious colony. Jamestown is a business colony. And of course, the key governmental body in Jamestown, remember, is the Virginia House of Burgesses. It is the oldest representative government, 1619, and it is still around today in the form of the Virginia General Assembly. And like I said, it also gives, is a model for our national government as well. The why. Why is Jamestown founded? Well, it's a business colony. People are looking for jobs and money. And why does it almost fail? It almost fails because the people are not willing to work. So they're over here looking for jobs and money, but they're not willing to work. Okay, that's why it almost failed. Like I said, in the beginning, they thought they were going to find gold, even though land equals wealth and power. They thought they would show up and gold would be everywhere and they would just find gold, and that's how they were going to get rich. Okay. So nobody was willing to work there for a while until it became obvious that they weren't going to find gold. Right. The when Jamestown was founded in 1617. I'm sorry, 1607. Jamestown was founded in 1607. Also, 1619 is a big year for Jamestown. That's when the first women arrive. That's when the first African slaves arrive, and that's when the House of Burgesses is founded. Okay, so 1607 is when it was founded. 1619 is going to be a watershed year because of those three things: slaves arrive, women arrive, and House of Burgesses. Okay, and of course, the where is Jamestown, which is in Virginia. Okay, it is in Virginia. You can still visit it today. The original site is open. They got some very, very cool archaeology out at that site today. So what? Why is it important? Because it is the first permanent colony in the New World. Why do we take time and talk about Jamestown besides the fact that we're in Virginia and Jamestown is in Virginia? Because it is the first permanent colony in the New World, the first permanent English colony in the New World. Okay, that's why it's a big deal. That's why we spend time talking about it. Okay, and then how was Jamestown saved? Well, not only did you have the Indians helping out by bringing food, not only did you have John Smith getting the people to work, but Jamestown is really going to be saved from failure because of the introduction of tobacco. Okay, that cash crop tobacco is what is going to help save Jamestown. Okay. So this was just kind of a summary of what we talked about in the acronym. Okay. You're going to have a little quiz on Jamestown. So these are the highlights. Be sure you know these. Jamestown founded in 1607. Jamestown's in Virginia. Why is it important? It's the first permanent English settlement in the New World. You had men and boys coming over first. They weren't willing to work. Then you had the arrival of John Smith as a leader. John Smith said, if you don't work, you don't eat. So that begins to turn things around. You have the important relationship with the Powhatan Indians who help bring food and help the colony survive. And then you have the introduction of cash crops in the form of tobacco, which is going to help the colony survive economically. Also, don't forget 1619, going to be a watershed year because that's when House of Burgesses is created. That's when the first Africans arrive. And that's when the first women arrive too in large numbers. Also, don't forget the term indentured servant. Remember, an indentured servant comes from a poor family. They want to come to the New World, but they cannot afford their own passage. So they agree to work for a period of time. Not only do they get passage to the New World, but they eventually get their freedom and they are able to own land and have tools and start their own life. Okay. So those are the key ideas behind Jamestown. We're going to talk about Plymouth next, and I'm going to try to highlight some of the differences between Jamestown and Plymouth.